Hello and welcome back to Stonehouse Homestead, where we're taking small steps towards self-sufficiency. We're using what we have to do what we can right here where we are. And today we are in the kitchen. We're going to be canning some dried beans today. We eat a lot of dried beans here. It's our main source of protein. We do plant kidney beans. I have some here that we planted. These are a few Jacob's cattle beans. And here's some black beans. These are all the ones that we have planted. I enjoy planting dried beans, but you have to plant an awful lot to get enough to fill your needs, or our needs at least, for the whole year. So in addition to what we grow, I also found that Sam's Club sells them in bulk. I've used some of these to freeze already, but for canning, to can the rest. These are pinto beans. It's a 10-pound bag of pinto beans for $5.30, so it's 53 cents a pound for pinto beans. When you think about meat and ground beef being almost $5 a pound for the good stuff, 53 cents a pound for your protein, I mean, there's no comparison. We use beans for lots of stuff: soups, stews, salads. We use them in gravy. I make a gravy with white beans that's really good. Chilies, burgers. I make my own burgers, so we use these a lot. So we're going to go ahead and start canning these today. Now the first step, I'm going to do the kidney beans right now. And I'll probably, since we only have a few Jacob's cattle beans, I'm going to mix them together. Beans, by the way, are very high in protein, complex carbohydrates. They've got iron, they've got lots of fiber, they've got magnesium. They're really good for you and relatively low in calories. So I highly recommend, if you aren't used to eating meals with beans, take a look at some recipes. I think you'll find that you might like some. Oops. Anyway, we're going to be doing the kidney beans today, and the first step is to rinse your beans and make sure you get all of the debris out and any stones. That's whether you buy them packaged or whether you've grown your own. So I'm just going to dump these here in my colander. Rinse them. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to pick out anything that's debris, anything that looks like that's a black bean in there. So, well, if they get mixed up, it's no big deal. Okay. All right, these look pretty good. Nice, pretty red kidney beans. So then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my pan from over here. Dump them in. And put enough water on them to cover them by a couple of inches, and then we're going to boil them on the stove for 2 minutes. After they boil for 2 minutes, we're going to just let them sit for a half an hour, and then we'll be back. Okay, so we have done our first soak and boil of the beans. We boiled them for 2 minutes, let them sit for an hour. This is what we have. This is why we have to go through this process before we can them. As if you can remember, they were real small dry beans, and if we try to put those into a jar and then put the liquid in and try to can them, we're going to break the jar, because these expand because they're soaking up water and they're rehydrating. So we have to do that first. So now what we have to do is bring them back over to our sink. Yeah, see, there's a lot more here now than there was the first time. Drain them. Do a quick rinse of them again. We did a pretty good rinse before, so you don't need to do much. Just, they're really hot. Just do a rinse. Now, I'm going to put them back in our pan. Cover with about 2 to 3 inches of water. And this time, we're going to put them back on the stove, bring them to a boil again, and just let them boil for 30 minutes. This partially cooks them. They're going to cook the rest of the way, not cook, but they're going to cook the rest of the way in the canner as they're being processed, so that when you open the can to use the beans, it's just like getting canned beans from the store, only they taste a lot better, I think, and you can control the salt that you put in them. So we're going to put this back on the stove, get this going. I'm going to rinse the black beans, and then we'll be back with the next step. Okay, so now we've done our second boiling and we're ready to put the beans in the jars. I do our beans in quart-sized jars because I always use at least 2 regular sized cans that you find at the grocery store of beans for our recipes. So I just need to use one of the quart-sized jars instead, and it saves us room downstairs storing it. I also have a pot of kidney beans on, so we'll do those next, but I'm going to do the black beans here first. You're going to make sure that your jars are nice.
You're interrupting us.
Make sure that your jars are nice and hot, because you obviously don't want to put boiling beans in a cold jar. That's a disaster waiting to happen. So I'm very glad that on my oven I have what's called a keep warm feature, and it's just to keep, of course, food warm until you serve it. But I just put the jars on a cookie sheet, put them in the oven, and put the keep warm feature on, and it keeps the jars nice and warm. You no longer have to sterilize your jars. There was a time when they recommended that all jars be sterilized and you had to keep them in a big pot of boiling water until you're ready to use them. But then they realized that, wait a minute, these jars are going into a pressure canner, and the pressure canner is designed to kill bacteria, and guess what? As long as the jars are clean, the insides of the jars are going to get sterilized during the process, so you really don't need to do that, thankfully. So it saves a lot of time and a lot of space, so I just make sure my jars are nice and clean and that they're warm, and now I'm going to fill them. Just use a funnel. Try to keep the sides as clean as possible, and you're going to ladle your beans and hot liquid into a hot jar. And the recommendation is to give 1 inch of what they call headspace. So you don't want to fill it to any more than 1 inch from the top of the jar rim. All right, and now we're just going to top it off with some liquid. 1 inch of headspace is roughly to the neck of the jar. These are called the shoulders of the jar. I'm going to fill it right to there. That's plenty of room, plenty of space. And that's it. Just liquid left. But you can add salt. You're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt to 1 quart of beans. I do it. You want to make sure that you're using canning or pickling salt, or any salt that is non-iodized. You don't want any iodine in your salt when you're canning. So I'll take this off. We'll set it over here. I'm going to grab a lid. Get my cloth a little wet. Make sure the top is nice and clean. Take my tongs and grab a lid. And a ring. These are the Tatler lids that we used in the peach canning video. If you didn't see that, you might want to go check that out. That's for high acid canning, which is different than what we're doing. We're doing low acid canning today. You're going to just screw your band on tight and then turn it back just a bit. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and grab the kidney beans, fill all those jars. Then we will go outside to the pressure canner, where we will talk about the pressure canner itself and get these beans going. Okay, so here we are outside getting ready to put the beans in. We're waiting for the water to start boiling on the pressure canner here. It's a very windy day out, so I hope this is coming through okay to you guys. This pressure canner here is an All-American. This pressure canner was a gift to us from a woman that I work with. This pressure canner was purchased in 1982. She was a stay-at-home mom and she had a large garden, and part of her contribution to the household was to grow most of their own produce and can it for the year. And then she used this quite often. Well, this thing is a workhorse. The All-Americans are workhorses. They're cast aluminum bottoms that never wear out, and the tops as well are cast aluminum. They do sell replacement lids if you need one, but this thing is working great, and it's, I think, going to work for years and years and years to come. So I highly recommend the All-American, although I honestly have to say I've not tried any other brands to compare it. These have great reputations, and so far I have been thrilled with this. So on our pressure canner, the pressure canner is used for low acid foods, foods such as green beans, dried beans like we're doing today, meat, broth, that type of thing. Things that need a lot of pressure and a lot of heat to kill the botulism spores that may be inside the jars. On the pressure canner, I use a dial gauge here to show us the pressure and the temperature. This is the vent here that we're going to look for steam to come out of these holes here once the pressure comes up. After it's been venting steam for about 10 minutes, we're going to close this off and let the pressure build up. And then back here we have an emergency valve, just in case something were to happen and the pressure gets up too high. This will automatically pop up and release pressure, so you're not going to have any accidents. There are people who I've read about online who are scared to death to use these things because they've heard all kinds of horror stories. These things have great safety features. I was a little bit nervous using it the first time, but since the first time I saw how easy it was, you follow directions, you're careful, you're not going to have any issues at all. So let's see here. Is our water boiling yet? Nope, not yet. We're going to wait for our water to come to boil. We'll put our jars in. This in particular will hold 7 quart-sized jars, or I have the ability to hold 14 pint-sized jars, just 2 levels. They do sell them that hold smaller amounts and some that hold larger amounts. It all depends on what you want and need. Also, I highly recommend that you have your gauge tested every year. Our local extension office will test canning pressure canner gauges. So I just take the lid into them, they'll test it, they'll tell me if it's accurate or not, and if it's not accurate, how much I would have to adjust for. They also have pressure canners that have weighted gauges. Each different amount of pressure that's called for has a different weight, and you put it into the rocker, and as the pressure comes up, it will rock. But I like this. I'm not interested in changing to another one, but some people love the weighted gauge. So we're going to wait for the water to come to a boil. We're going to put our 7 quart jars in, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we've got our water boiling. I'm going to put our jars in. Scooch them around. Once I started putting the jars in, the water calmed down a little bit, but that's okay. It'll come back up real quick once you get the lid on. All right, so there we go. 7 quart jars of beans of various varieties. I'll put our lid on. Now, another thing I like about these canners is that they don't have a gasket on them that wears out. They're gasketless. All you have to do is take a little petroleum jelly and make a thin layer around the edge, and that seals it. You don't have to worry about replacing gaskets. So we're going to line up the arrow on the lid with the notch on the side here. And then we're going to twist it so everything lines up. There's little hooks underneath here that hook onto this to help keep everything down should something happen. You're going to go opposite sides and you're just going to screw down with equal pressure on opposite sides. And now we're just going to sit and we're going to wait for the steam to vent. It'll take a little bit, and once that starts venting, we'll wait 10 minutes for it to vent for a full 10 minutes, and then we'll be able to bring it up to pressure. So while we're waiting, I just want to address some questions that you might have, such as why go through all of this to can dry beans when you could just buy them already canned on the shelf? Couple reasons. First off, especially if we're canning the ones that we grew ourselves, we know how they were grown. Even if we buy the dry beans, we know how much salt goes into them. We know if there's anything else in them. They're in the glass jars. They're not in any cans that might leach any kind of chemicals into the beans. And cost is a real big factor. When you look at a pound of pinto beans, like if I buy the 10-pound bag at Sam's Club for $5.30, it's 53 cents a pound. And in a pound of pinto beans, I can get the equivalent of about 4 cans, 15.5-ounce, I think they are, cans of pinto beans off of the shelf. So do the math. I mean, it's literally pennies compared to just buying them already done. You can also freeze them. I do that as well. I just like to have some on hand, canned, mostly canned, just in case something happens and we're out of electricity for any reason. I don't want everything in the freezer to go bad, and I don't have beans, so I still have some on the shelf. We also keep some dry too, so that we can just do them in the crock pot, throw them in before we go to work, and come home to a pot of beans that's done. Again, if we lose electricity for any reason, we can't use those beans quickly like that. We'd have to sit and cook them, which we could do, but if we have them canned and they're all ready to go, it's a lot easier and a lot better that way. So the amount of time it takes isn't really that much. This is the longest part, the canning part, and it's really easy. It's not complicated because you can do the initial parts, have that going, and go and do other things in the house or whatever you need to do. So it's not monopolizing a lot of your time. So that's why we do it. Cost, number one, we know what goes into it, and it's not that hard to do, so why not? Okay, we've been venting steam here for about 10 minutes, so I'm going to flip the valve closed. That closes it off. Steam stays inside now, and we're going to build up pressure on our gauge. We're going to watch. We need to build up to 10 pounds of pressure, and we need to leave it at 10 pounds of pressure for an hour and a half. So the last time this gauge was checked, Extension Office told me that I'm off by about 3 pounds, so I need to actually keep it at 13 pounds. Another thing I like about this canner is that I need to replace the gauge, and I can buy from All American just the gauge and replace it. I don't have to replace the whole thing, so that's another nice feature. So we're going to get it up to 13, and then it'll take some adjusting back and forth with the propane over there, but we're going to hold it at 13 for an hour and a half. So let's just sit and watch our gauge go up. Well, we are really enjoying making these videos for you and showing you a little peek at our life here on our little suburban homestead, and we hope that you're feeling encouraged or inspired to try some things for yourself at home, whether it's growing a few tomato plants in pots on your balcony or your deck or your patio, or finding a local farmer to buy bulk produce from to preserve for yourself and your family. Anything that you can do to help yourself is a good thing. So if you are feeling encouraged and you are enjoying these videos, we ask that you like us on our Facebook page, that you give us a thumbs up here on YouTube, that you subscribe to our channel, and that you tell your friends about us too. We'd really appreciate it. So we'll see you next time here on the little suburban Stonehouse homestead. Stop! You're gonna make me bust out laughing. It's not gonna help. Stop it!